How did Romans make their mosaics?
Mosaics were very popular in ancient Rome and, like realistic wall paintings, were used extensively to decorate the floors of private homes and villas of the wealthy. At the heart of a Roman mosaic are tesserae, small pieces of glass and stone, often in a cube shape. The tesserae were pressed into cement, which was also used as a sort of grout in the spaces between the stones. Mosaic panels, called emblemata, were usually built off-site by the mosaic artist and then installed into a floor. Romans liked to copy famous paintings in mosaic form, which required very tiny pebbles in order to achieve the detail of a painting. A number of lost Greek paintings still exist in a Roman mosaic form.
What was cobra?
Cobra was an international group of artists whose name was derived from the home cities of its founding members, Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. The group was founded by Danish painter Asger Jorn, 1914 to 1973, and poet Christian Dutremont, 1922 to 1979, in a Paris café in 1948. The group lasted until 1951. They rejected surrealism, and like other artistic movements after World War II, were interested in starting fresh, and developing a new art for the post-war age. For Cobra, this meant emphasizing spontaneous creativity and artistic experimentation. Many of the works by group members, which also included Karel Appel, 1921 to 2006, George Constant, 1920 to 2005, and Cornet, 1922 to 2010, were bold, expressive, and steeped in fantasy. In Jorn's painting in the beginning was the image, 1965 to 1966. Primary colors dominate and appear smeared across the canvas while Constant's fantastic animals, 1947, evokes primal instincts through childlike depictions of wild beasts. Cobra members also valued the art of all people, regardless of background, social class, or academic training, and were particularly inspired by children's drawings.
What is the Sistine Chapel?
In a letter to a friend in 1508, Michelangelo admitted that he disliked painting and really didn't want to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, now one of the most famous ceilings in the world. It is located in the Vatican, the official residence of the Pope in Rome. The Sistine Chapel, named after Pope Sixtus IV, was designed to be the same size as the Temple of Solomon and was built between 1475 and 1481. The interior of the chapel is covered in frescoes depicting Christian subjects and themes. Pope Julius II personally asked for Michelangelo to paint the ceiling frescoes, and after he reluctantly accepted, Rumor also has it that the artist shut himself up in the chapel for 4 years, refusing to let anyone else in. That part of the story is very unlikely. Michelangelo would have needed the support of his workshop apprentices to complete the project in 4 years. Michelangelo did not paint the walls of the Sistine Chapel. That work was completed by other artists such as Sandro Botticelli and Domenico Ghirlandaio, Michelangelo's former master. The wall frescoes visually narrate scenes from the Bible, including the story of Moses and the life of Christ. On the ceiling, Michelangelo depicted numerous Old Testament scenes, including David and Goliath, the creation of Adam, the fall from paradise, and Judith and Holofernes. With hundreds of figures in multiple poses, various different scenes, plants, nature, and illusionistic architectural elements, it's a wonder the Sistine Chapel isn't a sensory overload. But Michelangelo was able to infuse the entire 45 × 128-foot space with a sense of grace, calm, and awe.
What is beauty?
Humans are undoubtedly attracted to beautiful things. Beauty can be recognized in a golden sunset, a youthful face, or in any pleasing arrangement of forms and colors. However, the philosopher David Hume said, "Beauty is no quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them." Not only does this idea evoke the cliché, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but it also suggests that beauty doesn't necessarily serve a purpose. We humans are interested in beauty for its own sake.
Why are art historians so confused about the Arnolfini portrait?
The Arnolfini portrait, completed in 1434 by Jan van Eyck, is both enchanting and enigmatic. A great deal of questions surround the work. The painting depicts a well-dressed couple surrounded by evidence of wealth. Possibly a merchant named Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife, Giovanna Senemi, though new research indicates that these two individuals did not actually marry until over a decade after the portrait was painted, adding to the mystery. Perhaps the couple is instead from a different part of the extended Arnolfini family. Like the Marode altarpiece, the painting includes many symbolic objects, some religious and some secular. For example, the dog in the foreground is a symbol of love and loyalty, while the crystal prayer beads in the back of room symbolize the couple's piety. Debate rages on as to whether or not the woman in the portrait is pregnant, as her hand rests on the top of her stomach. But, perhaps the couple only desires a baby? One of the most curious parts of the painting is the mirror on the back wall. Just above this mirror is a note that reads, "Jan van Eyck was here." Within the mirror appear the backs of the couple along with the face of an additional figure. Is it Van Eyck himself? Art historians aren't sure. Regardless of the mysteries surrounding this painting, it is a masterfully detailed work and serves as a window into another world.
What is Africobra?
Africobra, an artists' collective founded in Chicago in 1968, stands for African Commune of bad relevant artists and developed out of the earlier group. OBAC, or Organization of Black American Culture, a multidisciplinary group of writers, historians, and artists. The group of artists who were painters, photographers, printmakers, fiber artists, and sculptors included Jeff Donaldson, 1932 to 2004, Wadsworth Jarrell, 1929, Barbara Jones Hagu, 1938, and others. It emphasized collaboration and explored African American identity and artistic heritage. In work that was often brightly colored, figurative, and focused on social themes. Donaldson, Jarrell, and other members of OBAC worked together to create the Wall of Respect, a mural painted on the south side of Chicago in 1967 to promote civil rights and community involvement. In 1973, the city of Chicago razed the building upon which the mural was painted. But the work spurred on similar politically minded mural projects both in the city and internationally.
What is a Zen garden?
Zen is a Japanese form of Buddhism that emphasizes meditation as a method of breaking free of everyday distractions to reach enlightenment. In China, this is known as Chan Buddhism. Zen gardens are an important part of the Buddhist tradition, as they are thought to aid in meditation and facilitate a sense of calm. The Seihoji Temple in Kyoto, Japan, is sometimes called the Moss Temple because of its meticulously manicured moss gardens. The temple was founded in the 8th century, and its gardens were redesigned according to Zen philosophies during the Muromachi period in the 14th century. Monks meditate in the mossy lower gardens, while rocks dominate the upper gardens, suggesting the drama of mountains. Some Zen gardens focus completely on rock arrangements, such as the rock garden at the Ryoanji Temple in Japan.
What is video art?
While artists such as Andy Warhol had experimented with film and video recordings, video art was born in 1965 when Fluxus artist Nam June Paik filmed the streets of New York City with his brand new Sony portable video camera and showed the videos mere hours later at a cafe. Video art, which is a medium, not a style, in the way that oil painting is a medium, represents a transition from mass media influence to television influence. Video art can take many forms, from use in sculpture and installations, to performances and videos can be broadcast live or recorded and displayed in various settings. In 1996, Douglas Gordon won the British Turner Prize for his video work 24-Hour Psycho, 1996. Contemporary video artists include Bill Viola, 1951, Matthew Barney, 1967. Creator of the Cremaster film series, and Canadian Stan Douglas, 1960, among many others.
What is luminism?
Luminism is a 20th century word used to describe a 19th century American painting style. Characterized by landscapes and nature scenes featuring diffused light effects and invisible brush strokes. Artists associated with the luminist sensibility include George Caleb Bingham, Asher Durand, Martin Johnson Head, and other artists also considered part of the Hudson River School. A good example of the style is Bingham's Fur Traders Descending the Missouri, 1845. A painting filled with luminous mist reflecting off the Missouri River during the early morning. Two figures seated in a canoe, father and son, wear bright clothes that contrast with the color and tone of the hazy trees in the background, while what is thought to be a bear cub sits in the far end of the canoe, casting a dark shadow over the water. Martin Johnson Head's Sunset over the Marshes, c. 1890-1904, is another example of American luminism. The painting depicts a red-tinged sunset over the salt marshes of Massachusetts, with a pointed haystack prominently positioned in the foreground. Luminism was an important part of early American painting as artists attempted to capture the essence of the country's landscapes and exemplifies both romantic and later realist tendencies in 19th century art.
Would they be strong enough to support such a heavy structure?
In the year 558 c. There was an answer: the dome collapsed, not because of the windows, but due to weakness in the supporting piers. A reconfigured dome was constructed in its place, steeper and therefore even higher than the original. This new dome, along with extra supports, has survived ever since. Nearly 1,000 years after its construction, the Hagia Sophia was converted to a mosque after the Ottomans took over Constantinople in 1453.
How did the Reformation affect art during and after the 16th century?
The Protestant Reformation had an enormous impact on all of Europe, forever changing the political power of the Catholic Church and shifting allegiances among European countries according to religion. The Reformation began in 1517 when Martin Luther published his 95 Theses, a declaration of protest against the Catholic Church, specifically with regards to the Church's selling of indulgences, and questioned the authority of the Pope. Luther even mentions the Pope's extravagant spending on the new St. Peter's Basilica project as a point of contention. Martin Luther was excommunicated by the Pope. But those who shared his feelings vowed to break away from the Church, resulting in violence that lasted decades. Those Christians who broke away from the Catholic Church were called Protestants. During the 16th century, Europe was divided among countries that supported Catholicism and those that supported the Protestants. The Catholic countries included Italy, Spain, France, Flanders, and Belgium. The Protestant countries were England, Switzerland, Germany, and the Northern Netherlands. Protestant artists and patrons approached art differently than their Catholic counterparts. In Protestant countries, religious subjects were less in demand and most patrons were wealthy individuals who favored portraits. Scenes depicting moral proverbs, still lifes, and eventually landscapes. In response to the Reformation, the Catholic Church launched the Counter-Reformation in an effort to revive Catholic faith. Catholic patrons commissioned Christian art that emphasized reverence of the Trinity and of the Virgin Mary, as well as demonstrated restraint in the use of nudity and pagan subject matter.
What is the Scylla crown?
Though influenced by the art and culture of China, Korean art is distinct and has a long history. Around 100 BCE, a kingdom known as the Silla Kingdom took control over most of the Korean peninsula. The Silla crown is a gold and jade headpiece likely made somewhere between the 5th and 6th centuries CE, made from sheets of gold and adorned with jewels and spangles. The upright styling of the crown has been linked to either trees or antlers, which symbolize life and supernatural power. It is possible that this crown was either ceremonial, or never meant to be worn at all.
Who was Nicholas Poussin?
Nicolas Poussin, 1594–1665, was a French painter who spent a great deal of time studying and working in Rome, where he was greatly inspired by the Roman ruins he saw there. Poussin was an intellectual artist who was favored by similarly minded patrons. He is known for his sophisticated subjects inspired by philosophy, ancient history, and the Old Testament. His fascinating painting, Dance to the Music of Time, c. 1638–1640, is full of complex symbolism. In the center of the painting, 4 maidens, or possibly 3 maidens and 1 male, wearing Roman clothing, hold hands and dance in a circle to the beat of the lyre, played by a winged and bearded personification of time. Tiny cherubs play around their feet. One blows bubbles while the other holds an hourglass, symbols of the fragile and fleeting nature of life. Next to the dancers is a tall sculpture depicting the 2-headed Roman god, Janus, whose faces can see both into the future and into the past. In the sky above, Aurora, The dawn, leads Apollo, whose chariot arcs across the sky, bringing with it the sun. The painting draws heavily on classical figures and has a stoic, serious tone closely associated with classical art. The dancers are thought to be personifications of both the four seasons, as well as representations of human progress, specifically poverty, labor, wealth, and luxury. Although the painting has been interpreted in many ways, it is perhaps a representation not just of the fragility of life, but the impermanence of all civilization.
Who is Amitabha Buddha?
Amitabha Buddha was a mortal king who reached an enlightened state and became a Buddha. In the tradition of Pure Land Buddhism, the most popular form of Buddhism in China, known as the Buddha of infinite life and infinite light, as well as Buddha of the West. Amitabha Buddha promises rebirth in paradise, or Western Pure Land, for those with faith.
What is a reliquary?
A reliquary is a vessel meant to hold a relic, or a surviving trace of a holy person. Many churches along pilgrimage routes displayed relics, which attracted traveling pilgrims. Miraculous powers were attributed to some relics, which could include preserved bodies, body parts, or the personal belongings of saints or important religious figures. Reliquaries could be as simple as a square box, or as elaborate as a fine sculpture. An example of a Romanesque reliquary is the statue of Saint Foy from the Abbey Church of Conques, holding the actual skull of Saint Foy. This 33-inch figurative sculpture has a wooden core and is covered in silver gilt and jewels.
What is futurism?
Futurism was an energetic Italian art movement started by the poet Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, 1876–1944, who wrote the first futurist manifesto in Le Figaro, a French newspaper. In 1909, Marinetti wanted futurism to be a wide-reaching movement that embraced the speed and power of modern industrialism. The goal was to reject the past and to modernize contemporary culture violently if necessary. Visually, futurism would not have existed without cubism, and many futurist paintings feature fragmented forms and geometric near-abstraction. However, the futurists tried to distance themselves from this inheritance. Painters associated with futurism include Umberto Boccioni, 1882–1916, Gino Severini, 1883–1966, and Carlo Carra, 1881–1916. The futurists created abstract images of machines and placed an emphasis on movement. Giacomo Balla's dynamism of a dog on a leash, leash in motion, 1912, depicts a small dog with blurry legs and a blurry tail made up of quickly dashed, repeated brush strokes. Umberto Boccioni incorporated sculpture into the Futurist repertoire. With works such as Unique Forms of Continuity in Space, 1913. This flowing, abstract sculpture was cast in bronze and creates an interplay between two- and three-dimensional space as a formidable figure with outstretched legs, and no arms, strides forward on a horizontal plane. Futurism changed after World War I. Boccioni was killed after being thrown from his horse during a military exercise, and the landscape of Europe, both physically and artistically, was no longer the same.
What is the subject of a work of art?
The subject is what a particular work of art represents. Recognizing the subject of a work of art is a good first step in understanding what meaning the piece might be communicating. Not all works of art have a subject. For example, an abstract sculpture might not be representational. But that does not mean the sculpture expresses no meaning.
What happened to the work of Ace?
In April of 2003, the work of Ace was stolen from the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. During the civil unrest that followed the U.S. invasion of the country, it was a devastating loss for art history, and especially the people of Iraq, for whom the vase represents an important part of their cultural heritage. Fortunately, the vase was returned a few months later, though it was badly damaged.
Who was Benjamin West?
Benjamin West, 1738 to 1820, was an American-born painter who studied in Philadelphia and Rome before establishing a successful career as a history painter in London, making him the first American artist. With such a successful international career, he even served as president of the British Royal Academy of Art after Joshua Reynolds, and was financially supported by a powerful patron, King George III. West's historical paintings strongly adhered to neoclassical conventions, however, in a surprising change from tradition. West's The Death of General Wolfe, 1770, depicted contemporary, rather than historical events, and included images of the king's army wearing their contemporary uniforms, not ancient dress. Although the king, and Joshua Reynolds, aggressively disliked this change, it proved extremely popular amongst the public. The king changed his tune, and named West the royal history painter.
What is Arabic calligraphy?
Beautiful calligraphy is very important in Islamic art and is a primary form of fine art and decoration. Calligraphy, or decorative handwriting, is used to decorate not only books and manuscripts, but also carpets, tapestries, and even architectural surfaces. The dome of the Great Mosque at Córdoba, for example, is covered in mosaics which feature the curvilinear Arabic script. In Islam, writing is one of the most elegant and honored forms of art, and is linked to God's revelation to the Prophet Muhammad. In the Quran, God declares, "Recite. Thy Lord is the most generous, who hath taught by means of the pen. Hath taught man what he knew not." Curlxi 8.1 as quoted in Jansen 281.
What is a skyscraper?
A skyscraper is a tall, multi-story building with a steel frame and thin walls known as curtain walls because they are not load-bearing. Because the steel frame acts as a support skeleton. Skyscrapers are often covered in glass or windows, similar in some ways to a Gothic cathedral. While the earliest skyscrapers were built in Midwest cities such as Chicago and St. Louis, some of the most famous early skyscrapers are New York's Chrysler Building, 1930, and Empire State Building, 1931. Along with the development of skyscrapers came the need to introduce new fireproofing and elevator technology.
Who was Peter Paul Rubens?
Peter Paul Rubens, 1577 to 1640, was a Flemish painter whose work is characterized by a rich, painterly style and a lively, expressive tone. His paintings are often monumental in size, include deep red colors, a favorite of Rubens, and were sought after by both aristocratic and Catholic patrons. He painted mythological, genre, and Christian subjects. Rubens worked for patrons such as King Charles I of England, the Habsburgs, and the Spanish royal family. Rubens traveled across Europe studying earlier masters and even contemporaries such as Caravaggio. He was highly successful, and was able to build his own grand home and studio in Antwerp. Rubens was a prolific painter. Some of his most famous paintings include The Raising of the Cross, c. 1610, which is a 15-foot tall triptych in the Church of St. Walpurga in Antwerp, as well as Venus and Adonis, c. 1635, and the recently attributed Massacre of the Innocents, c. 1611, which sold for over $70 million at auction in 2002.
Who is Bill Viola?
Bill Viola, 1951, is a contemporary video and sound artist known for exploring the role of technology in his work and his video and audio. One of his most well-known and emotionally powerful pieces is Heaven and Earth. 1992, a sculptural installation in which two video monitors face one another. One monitor displays a scene of the artist's mother on her deathbed while the other screen plays a scene of his nearly newborn son, juxtaposing the beginning of life with the end. Because of the highly reflective surface of the screens, the death and birth scenes merge into one. Viola's larger installations can create a completely immersive environment through video and audio projection, making the viewer a part of the art. Viola's 1976 work, He Weeps for You, used video to allow gallery visitors to see and hear themselves reflected in a water droplet that slowly falls from a brass valve. An image that was magnified on a large screen.
Who are some of the important international artists working today?
The contemporary art world is increasingly international in scope, and a number of artists from around the world have achieved critical acclaim and success. The following is a short list of some of these artists.
What is Surrealist automatism?
Surrealist artists and writers attempted to free themselves from the restrictions of rationality by tapping directly into their creative subconscious through automatic drawing and writing. André Breton described this process, which he called pure psychic automatism, in the Surrealist Manifesto. And surrealist artists such as André Masson, Joan Miro, and Max Ernst are known for their spontaneous, free-form work. Many of Masson's automatic drawings were done with pen and ink, while Ernst developed what he called frottage. In this technique, Ernst made rubbings of textured surfaces, such as wood floor, which were then incorporated into larger collage works.
What is the Mayan Codex style?
Artists, held in high regard in Mayan society, wrote hieroglyphs and made illustrations in ancient folded books called codices. There is a clear link between the style of the art produced in these codices and other types of art, such as painted ceramics. Mayan Codex style art is filled with expressive characters and bold colors. These paintings, whether in a book or on a vessel, have text which helps to explain the meaning of the images. These hieroglyphic inscriptions sometimes represent images and are therefore pictographic, and sometimes represent sounds. A system of dots and bars was used to mark time. Scholars think it was common for the writing and the illustrations to have been completed by the same person, and refer to them as artist scribes.
What is cyclitic sculpture?
The cyclitic culture, c. 3000 to 1200 BCE, is known for its ceramic figurines. Cyclitic artisans made their pieces out of various materials, from poor quality clay to marble, and represented humans, animals, and other forms. Some of the most well-known cyclitic sculptures are of women. These pieces can range in size and are highly abstract and stylized. The surfaces are smooth with little carved detail. Facial features and other details would have been painted. In many examples, a figurine's only facial feature is a nose, while arms are crossed over the chest, as if the figure is either asleep or dead. One side of the figure is flat and the toes are pointed, an indication that the piece was meant to lie on its back. In fact, many of these sculptures have been found near graves, raising the possibility that they served a funerary purpose, though their exact function is unknown.
Who was Manet?
Édouard Manet, 1832 to 1883, is considered by many to be the first modern painter. He not only bridged the gap between realism and impressionism, but his work foreshadows early 20th century painting styles and approaches. He was highly knowledgeable about art history, and fiercely rebellious. Preferring art he deemed sincere, rather than perfect. Along with thousands of paintings by other premier artists of his day, Manet's work was rejected by the Salon, the official art exhibition of the Palace of Fine Arts. But, Manet had the opportunity to shock critics and viewers at a specially organized Salon de Refuses, or Salon of the Rejected, with his painting Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. The Luncheon on the Grass, 1863, and again in 1865 with another masterpiece, Olympia. Though Manet's work drew inspiration from the great masters, he focused on scenes of modern life, including café and leisure scenes around Paris, war paintings and lithographs inspired by contemporary literature. His work is among the most critically acclaimed and valuable in all of art history. However, Manet never achieved this kind of universal recognition during his lifetime. Now, he is considered one of the founding fathers of modern art.
What is the hieratic scale?
The hieratic scale is a system used to visually communicate power in Egyptian, as well as the art of other cultures, including the ancient Near East and in medieval European art, for example. Significant or important individuals, such as pharaohs, were depicted as being much larger than any figures in a scene. In the Narmer palette, the hieratic scale helps to identify Narmer in a busy scene filled with many individuals.
Who is Bill Viola?
Bill Viola, 1951, is a contemporary video and sound artist known for exploring the role of technology in his work and his video and audio. One of his most well-known and emotionally powerful pieces is Heaven and Earth. 1992, a sculptural installation in which two video monitors face one another. One monitor displays a scene of the artist's mother on her deathbed while the other screen plays a scene of his nearly newborn son, juxtaposing the beginning of life with the end. Because of the highly reflective surface of the screens, the death and birth scenes merge into one. Viola's larger installations can create a completely immersive environment through video and audio projection, making the viewer a part of the art. Viola's 1976 work, He Weeps for You, used video to allow gallery visitors to see and hear themselves reflected in a water droplet that slowly falls from a brass valve. An image that was magnified on a large screen.
What is the Vitruvian Man?
The Vitruvian Man is a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci of a visual concept described by the Roman architect Vitruvius in the 1st century B. CE in his work on architecture. As an architect, Vitruvius was interested in harmony, symmetry, and balance, all qualities that were highly valued by classically minded artists and architects during the Renaissance, including Leonardo da Vinci. He explained his belief that supremely beautiful and unified architecture could be created using the proportions of the human body as a guide. As Vitruvius never provided any illustrations of his own, many different artists attempted to visually depict the concept. Da Vinci's drawing is likely the most familiar version. An idealized human male is depicted standing tall within a circle and a square. The figure's outstretched arms are shown in duplicate. One set reaches the point at which the circle meets the square, while the second set runs horizontally, reaching the vertical sides of the square. The figure also has two pairs of legs, one straight, and one outstretched, mirroring the position of the arms. The drawing highlights Leonardo da Vinci's mathematical creativity and emphasizes the Renaissance preference for geometric balance.
Who was Eugene Delacroix?
Eugene Delacroix, 1798 to 1863. Was not interested in the defined forms and classical stoicism promoted by the Academy. This French Romantic painter is known for his use of thick brush strokes and sweeping dramatic scenes inspired by mythology, current events, and his trips to North Africa. Delacroix's Massacre at Chios, 1822 to 1824, was based on the Greek struggle for independence from the Ottoman Empire, an event that influenced many Romantic writers and artists. The painting communicates sympathy for the exhausted Greeks by focusing on the details of individual faces. A menacing Turk dominates the scene as his dark horse rears up over the group of victims. Similarly, Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, July 28, 1830, 1830, makes heroes of unlikely revolutionaries who passionately take up arms as their brethren have fallen, ready to overthrow the monarchy. Red, white, and blue, the colors of the French flag, draw attention to the female personification of liberty, whose bare breast recalls classic sculpture, as she emerges from the dust and smoke. She holds up the French flag in one hand and a bayonet in the other, leading the revolutionaries into battle. This romantic painting emphasizes idealism and heroism in its depiction of an important historical event.
Who were some of the leading early photographers?
Nadar, 1820–1910. Nadar, or Gaspard Félix Tournachon, was an ambitious French photographer known for portraits and aerial photographs of Paris, and is credited with championing photography as a form of fine art. Julia Margaret Cameron, 1815–1879. Cameron didn't start taking photographs until she was nearly 50 years old. Her portraits featured a soft, diffused light that captured the essence of her subjects. Her goal was to ennoble photography and to secure for it the character and uses of high art by combining the real and ideal and sacrificing nothing of the truth by all possible devotion to poetry and beauty. As quoted in Julia Margaret Cameron Getty Museum. Oscar Ridgelander, 1813–1875. Ridgelander was a Swedish artist who first used photography to aid in his painting. He innovated techniques in photomontage and combination printing, and was interested in both portraiture and allegorical scenes. Matthew Brady, 1823–1896. He was the leading American portrait photographer and journalist whose many famous images include portraits of President Abraham Lincoln and Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Brady organized a corps of photographers, including Timothy O'Sullivan, who documented the horrors of the Civil War. Jacob A. Riis, 1849–1914. Riis was a Danish-American activist and photographer who documented the plight of the poor in New York City in photographs such as Home of the Italian Rag Picker, Jersey Street, c. 1888–1889. He is known as an innovator with his use of the magnesium flash. Edward Muybridge, 1830–1904. Muybridge was an English-born photographer who worked primarily in America and developed an advanced shutter mechanism for the camera that allowed for high-speed photography that could create moving pictures, likely inspiring Thomas Edison in his development of the cine camera. His galloping horse, 1878, captured 12 shots of a running racehorse that changed the way artists depicted such an action.
What was the Hudson River School?
The artists of the Hudson River School, such as Thomas Cole, Asher B. Durand, Frederick Edwin Church, and Albert Bierstadt, were American artists interested in establishing an American tradition separate from the influences of European art. The work of this informal group was certainly initially inspired by Romanticism and European landscapes, but demonstrated a certain realism, and was philosophically tied to transcendentalism. As expressed by the American philosophers Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Through open air, or plein air, painting, which required significant hiking and traveling to locations that reached from the Catskills to Niagara Falls to Yosemite Valley. The artists of the Hudson River School depicted an apparent untouched Eden that juxtaposed sweetly pastoral scenes with the power of the American wilderness.
How did the world change during the Baroque period?
Between the mid-16th century and the mid-18th century, Europe and the rest of the world went through significant changes. During this time, Europeans were engaged in the age of exploration. They sent out fleets of ships into the world's oceans with various goals, including competition between one another for political domination, economic expansion, and religious conversion of the people in the so-called New World. In Europe, the 30 Years' War raged on from 1618 to 1648, forever shifting power on the continent and weakening the Holy Roman Empire. Many significant scientific discoveries also took place during the Baroque period, including Isaac Newton's discovery of gravity. Philosophy was impacted by Descartes' revolutionary statement, "I think, therefore I am," making him the father of modern philosophy.
What is the difference between the Baroque and the Renaissance?
One of the main giveaways that you are looking at a Baroque painting, rather than a work done in the Renaissance, is the overall dramatic effect. Whereas paintings from the Renaissance are evenly lit, balanced, and symmetrical, Baroque paintings usually feature strong diagonals, intense contrasts between dark and light tones, chiaroscuro, and ornate decoration. Swiss art critic Heinrich Wölfflin created a list of polarities, or points of contrast between Renaissance and Baroque art in his influential text, Principles of Art History. These polarities can be applied to architecture, painting, and sculpture. The final two, indicated with an asterisk, are the most complex, and are controversial amongst art critics and historians. When reading through these contrasting characteristics, think about Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, c. 1495 to 1498, as a good example of a Renaissance painting, while Tintoretto's Last Supper, 1594, is more characteristic of the Baroque style.
What is the significance of tattoos for Pacific cultures?
Tattooing was, and continues to be, an important part of cultural and religious tradition throughout the Pacific, especially in Polynesia and New Zealand. The English word for tattoo even comes from the Polynesian word tata. Body art, including clothing and jewelry, as well as tattoos, indicates status, with specific patterns associated with particular ranks within a society. Tattoo designs were usually geometric. The Maori of New Zealand, whose word for tattoo is moko, have separate tattoo styles for men and women. And tattoos of different meanings were placed on different parts of the body. For example, tattoos on the right side of the face represented social status and lineage handed down from the father's side of the family, while tattoos on the left side on the face communicated maternal lineage. Bodies of the most prominent members of society could be completely covered in tattoos. After a period of decline, tattoos are once again being used to communicate status and cultural identity among the Maori of New Zealand.
How does Roman architecture differ from Greek architecture?
Greek and Roman architecture are together referred to as classical architecture, as they share many characteristics including an adherence to the classical Greek orders of architecture and a sense of symmetry and balance. But, there are some key differences. Whereas the Greeks favored marble, the Romans invented concrete, and they relied on this key building material in much of their architecture. Romans also emphasized circular forms and made extensive use of the arch, vault, and dome in their building projects, unlike the post and lintel structure of Greek buildings. While Greek buildings tended to feature cramped interiors built on a more human scale, Roman buildings had dramatically high ceilings and were generally more flamboyant than their Greek counterparts.
What is the difference between an art historian and an art critic?
While art historians are interested in the meaning of a work of art and its cultural and historical context, the job of the art critic is to evaluate, to decide whether or not a particular piece of art is good or successful. Generally, critics view art at galleries and museums, or in private collections, and they write their personal opinions about the art they see. Like the definition of art itself, however, the definition of art criticism is murky at times. And James Elkins, a well-respected critic and scholar, raises questions about how the two are differentiated, noting that art historians, along with their art critic colleagues, are known to share their personal opinions as well.
Levi is surprised at this and seems to question Christ with a gesture that indicates, "Who, me?"
Christ is calling Levi, who will become Saint Matthew, to a life of faith rather than sin. Like other work by Caravaggio, the calling of Saint Matthew was shocking, and popular. For its realism and for its juxtaposition of Roman street life with divine, holy figures. One does not usually see Christ walk into a bar, for example. The painting is a good example of Caravaggio's use of tenebrism, an exaggerated form of chiaroscuro with sharp contrasts of dark and light. Caravaggio's style of tenebrism was hugely popular during the Baroque period, and was used by artists from Rembrandt to Zurbaran. The calling of Saint Matthew focuses on a familiar theme for Caravaggio, that of the redemption of even the most sinful souls.
How did Korean art change during the Choson period?
The Choson dynasty lasted in Korea from 1392 until 1910, when Japan annexed the country. During this very long period, Korean art was heavily influenced by Chinese art styles and ideas. But a specifically Korean, often secular, style of art slowly developed. For example, the artist, Kim Hongdu, 1745 c. 1814, was known for his lively genre paintings that captured a sense of daily life in 18th and early 19th century Korea. His paintings often depicted people engaging in normal activities such as studying at school, or sports activities like wrestling. He is known for a painting called Schoolroom, c. 1814, which shows a young student bursting into tears when he doesn't understand his lesson. The schoolmaster, wearing a rectangular hat and a beard, looks distracted and unsure of how to proceed with the lesson.
How did Rembrandt achieve such thoughtful expression in his work?
Rembrandt's paintings invite subtle, emotional engagement. When gazing upon a Rembrandt portrait, it feels as if you are looking at a real, living person, whose thoughts and emotions are fully accessible. This is no easy feat throughout his life. Rembrandt painted more self-portraits than any other artist in the 17th century. He practiced by making faces in a mirror in an attempt to capture the likeness of multiple emotions and states of mind. In some of his early drawings, youthful Rembrandts can be seen displaying shock, disgust, fear, and confidence. With his great painting skill, he was able to effectively represent textures and tangible details of clothing and skin. In his 1631 portrait of Nikolais Rutz, a fur merchant, the man's fur coat looks supremely soft and luxurious, highlighting his wealth and business success. And yet Rutz appears humble and modest due to his thoughtful gaze, furrowed brows, and slightly bent posture. One of Rembrandt's later self-portraits. From 1661, shows the artist after significant financial failures and the death of his beloved wife, Saskia. Rembrandt's illuminated form emerges from the darkness, his eyes in shadow and his clothing simple. His familiar face is now lined with wrinkles and his former confidence is now lost to sloping shoulders and puffed cheeks. Through subtle manipulations in texture, lighting, and detail, Rembrandt demonstrates his masterful ability to facilitate an emotional connection between viewer and painting.
Who was Eva Hesse?
Eva Hesse, 1936 to 1970. Was a German-American painter and sculptor whose Jewish family dramatically escaped Nazi Germany. Her highly experimental art is usually categorized as minimalist, however. Unlike many minimalists, narrative and personal history are an important part of her work. Her installation sculpture Rope Piece, 1969 to 1970, a tangled, slightly frightening web of rope, string, and wire, has a different form each time it is moved to a new location. The piece has been described as a drawing in space. Her work Accession to, 1968 to 1969, now at the Detroit Institute of Art, is a cube made of vinyl and steel. The cube is open at the top, revealing a lush layer of fiber-like tubes, a reaction against the severity of much minimalist art.
What are textiles?
Textiles are fiber-based fabrics such as cotton, wool, or silk, or synthetic fibers such as polyester. The fibers are made into cloth through various techniques including weaving, tapestry, and felting. Textiles are a major art form around the world and are gaining in popularity amongst contemporary fine artists.
What happened? Did the medieval artists forget how to draw? Is this a result of the so-called Dark Ages?
Looking at medieval art from a contemporary perspective occasionally raises questions about quality, but it is important to remember that medieval artists, including painters, were highly skilled craftsmen who worked meticulously on their designs. Medieval artists made specific choices about their work and were motivated not by realism, but by religion. In the 6th century, a debate arose amongst Christian church leaders as to whether or not figurative imagery was appropriate for religious art. Then, Pope Gregory the Great declared, "Painting can do for the illiterate what writing does for those who can read," as quoted in Gombrich 135. The goal of medieval art, according to Pope Gregory, was to simply and clearly depict religious themes. The quality of the artwork was not supposed to overshadow its religious content for fear of idol worship.
Who was Nada?
Nadar was the common nickname of French photographer Gaspard Félix Tournac, 1820–1910, who was interested in photography for both its artistic value and its commercial potential. He was particularly enthused by photography's potential for realism, and he wanted to capture accurate details of the city of Paris. He even built a mobile darkroom in the basket of a hot air balloon, and could be seen soaring overhead, capturing aerial views of the city. The French lithographer, Honoré Daumier, published a lithograph, Nadar elevating photography to the height of art, 1862, depicting Nadar working in his balloon, his face pressed up against the lens of a camera while his top hat blows away in the wind. The lithograph emphasizes Nadar's high hopes for the role of photography in the fine arts. In addition to his photographs of the city, Nadar took many portraits of notable figures in French society, including the poet Charles Baudelaire, the writer Alexandre Dumas, and Sarah Bernhardt, one of the most famous actresses of the day.
What is postmodernism?
Postmodernism is a complicated term and a complicated theory, which can be applied to art, architecture, literature, philosophy, and more. Literally meaning after modernism, postmodernism has been described as everything from a rejection of modernism, to a critique of modernism, to a new phase of it. So, postmodernism is either anti-modernism, or just more of it. Either way, postmodernism is defined in relation to its earlier counterpart. If modernism is unified and serious, then postmodernism is varied and playful. If modernism is a search for absolute truth, then postmodernism is a declaration that there is no such thing. Postmodernism began to be recognized as an approach to art starting in the 1970s, and is perhaps most easily recognized in architecture. A good example of modernist architecture is Gerrit Rietveld's Schroeder House, 1924. Which was designed with a uniform style, complete with coordinating furniture and interior design. By contrast, the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, designed in 1975, reflects the influence of various styles of architecture from Renaissance to Baroque to modernism and is made up of a multitude of forms and colors. Where Schroeder House was stylistically unified, the Piazza d'Italia is stylistically diverse.
What is muralismo?
Muralismo, or Mexican muralism, is an art movement that developed in the 1920s. Muralismo was characterized by socially aware nationalistic murals that glorified Mexican history and cultural traditions after a period of political upheaval following the overthrow of the Mexican dictator, General Porfirio Diaz. Three key figures of the movement were Diego Rivera, 1886 to 1957, José Clement Orozco, 1883 to 1949, and David Alfaro Siqueiros, 1896 to 1974. Murals were commissioned by the new government for public spaces such as schools, churches, and government buildings as a celebration of Mexican nationalism and with the idea that art should be accessible to all.
What markings distinguish images of the Buddha?
The Buddha is not a god, but an enlightened being who has achieved suprahuman status and has escaped the Buddhist cycle of life and death. The earliest images of the Buddha show the holy figure as a monk wearing long robes and can be identified by certain body attributes called lakshanas. As a boy, the Buddha was wealthy. Therefore, one important body attribute is elongated ears due to years of wearing heavy jewelry. Another important marking is called the urna, a curl of hair between the Buddha's eyebrows, often depicted as a dot. Mudras, or hand gestures, allow images of the Buddha to convey specific messages. For example, if the Buddha is shown with his right hand reaching towards the ground, this represents a call to witness the Buddha's enlightenment and is a mudra known as bhumisparsha, earth touching.
Who was Hieronymus Bosch?
Hieronymus Bosch, 1450 to 1516, was a successful painter from the Netherlands who painted large, complex, usually Christian-themed works of art that continue to puzzle viewers and scholars to this day. An example of his imaginative and highly skilled work is the triptych, The Garden of Earthly Delights, which depicts the Garden of Eden on the left, earthly life in the center, and hell on the right. On the exterior of the triptych, Bosch painted what scholars believe is the creation of the earth. The Garden of Earthly Delights is filled with surreal imagery, such as a bulbous pink fountain, a sharp knife with a pair of human ears, figures cavorting inside transparent spheres, and monsters feeding on souls in hell. While some scholars believe certain images are metaphors for alchemy, a tradition of science and philosophy focused on turning various metals into gold, the work is generally considered to be a critique of human behavior, suggesting that sin will be punished in hell. Peter Bruegel the Elder's Netherlandish Proverbs, 1559. Also known as the topsy-turvy world, is similarly focused on human folly.
What is an altarpiece?
An altarpiece is a painted wood panel, usually placed on the altar in a church. Altarpieces come in many forms. One of the most common types of altarpieces is the triptych. So named because it is made up three connected panels. Often, the panels of a triptych are hinged and the outer panels can be closed like doors, revealing additional exterior paintings. An altarpiece with only two panels is called a diptych, while an altarpiece with many panels, such as the Ghent altarpiece, discussed in the following section, is known as a polyptych.